Okay, this will be, after I close the door a little bit, this will be our second online lecture. Sorry for the delay. Here we are. This lecture is probably the one you have to pay attention to the most. I normally do this in class. However, I think that was a mistake. Once I started doing these recordings, once I wrote this book, and I realized I had left out some important things, I started correcting it, but as I said to you before, some things have really I've not had time to fix some of the things that really need to be improved. Naturally, when we're talking about American and British culture, as we get closer to the present, time slows down. So we started, 5,000 years ago with the settlement of England in the Stone Age, basically. Talked about the geography of the islands, and we'll do the same thing with America. We'll go back, before Columbus, the pre-Columbian stuff. A little bit of Vikings might show up briefly, and then America, will rapidly come to be independent, and then that's where American history really starts. We're doing the same thing with British culture, except the honest truth is I'm doing my PhD on Shakespeare, and it's taking a while. I'm on my 4th year, but it's probably going to take 5 years to finish. And that's what I know the most. The 16th century and the 17th century, Shakespeare sort of bridges, from the 1500s, the end of the 1500s, and Elizabeth to James. And chapter 3 is enormous. It's much bigger than any other chapter. And I didn't even realize this when I was writing it, because I was writing it as fast as I could. So originally, all the editing that's been done hasn't really balanced out the fact that chapter 3 is the biggest chapter, and chapter 1 and 2 and 8 are too small. So those things have to be balanced out. So we're missing a big piece of the picture here, because we're going to go in class. I'm going to talk about the Normans probably for an hour and a half. We'll see how it goes as quickly as I can. But there's really that how do these French Vikings, if you want to call them that, merge with the English culture, and how does English come out on top? The early Norman kings who are speaking French and are dominating the culture, but the English themselves are maintaining this English culture that goes back pre-Alfred, back to the Germanic invasions. We don't have a lot of information until Alfred and the Anglo-Saxon chronicles and Old English starts to be written down. We have a few things that are, 800, 900, 1000 AD kind of thing, but many of those things have been lost. And every English history student, and this is not a history class, but 1066 is the magic number. We'll just throw it up there. For me, it's an unforgettable number. For you, it's like, just remember 1066 and just don't forget it. We talked about at the beginning of class, 1592 is Imjin, 1492 is Columbus, 1392 is the beginning of the Joseon dynasty. You just got to get the number in your head, these certain numbers, right? 1945 is the end of World War II. August 15th is independence for Korea because the Japanese surrender. These are just very important dates in Korean culture, and there's a few that you need to know. I said 1066 and I said 1707. These are ones I chose, but these are ones that famous professors from the United Kingdom would agree with me about. This is the beginning of the United Kingdom. This is the Norman conquest, and this is the beginning of what becomes Great Britain. So the Normans don't just stop in England. They spread all over the place. But really, what we want to focus on is this, merger of what is the English culture, which is a combination of Danish, Anglo-Saxon, Jutes are in there somewhere, Romans and Celtics, right? they're the English, and the Normans are not them. The Normans are not French either. They're part French and part, they're Christianized French Vikings. So we'll talk about that in class and on a Friday, which will be likely tomorrow, 2 days from now. It's late at night, so you'll excuse me for a minute. I've decided to do a few things differently. This is the first thing. This will all be recorded, so you'll be able to check it easier, because sometimes people don't pay attention as much in lecture. Sometimes students pay attention more. That's why writing notes down instead of using your phone to text your friends at the back of the classroom equals better grades. I'm just saying. If you sit there and you look at your phone or you don't listen, I'm only telling you the stuff that I think is very important. If you read the whole textbook and you understand it, of course you'll get an A+. But I don't think very many students do that. So if you pay attention to what I'm saying, what I'm emphasizing, and what I write on the board, it'll help. I've been watching YouTube probably too much for my health, but I love certain people. They're mostly professors or graduate students who have their own YouTube channels, and when they teach you about something cultural, political, one of my favorite guys, he's an economic historian. They do a lot of stuff. I can't do everything they're doing. I'll get to it. I'll do my best to become a real YouTuber, but I'm not. I'm a classroom lecturer. So you're gonna have to just bear with me as I turn myself into a better, in front of camera teacher. But I'm not there yet. One thing though is just simplifying things instead of just talking about what's in the textbook or quoting what what you can read at home. Just taking the sort of essence of what I'm giving you details in the textbook, but these are supposed to be interesting things that make you think, wait a second, this is a process and this is a culture that I want to understand, and this is what's happening. This is one of the things. I will tell you a few different things, and these are the things that show up again and again on the quizzes and on the tests. I'm not going to ask you how old Henry II was when he married Eleanor of Aquitaine. That's not a question that will ever be on a test. I'm going to ask you what his character was like, and what are the strange things that he said, or what did he do that was important that changed English culture, okay? So let's just we're going to talk about kings and queens for a while. This is not there is a monarchy in England still. It's very important to understand why, that there's a British monarchy that goes back to 1066, and no other country on earth has that kind of lineage. And should we have it or shouldn't we? I don't care what you think. I care what you think. I just don't want to argue with you. I don't want to argue with you. I have friends who are professors. I have friends with PhDs. They all are experts and they have different opinions. So I don't mean I don't care what you think. I care what you think, but I just don't want to say you're wrong or you're right. There's a reason why there's a monarchy. Should it still be there? Does it need to be removed? There's a lot of reasons why it hasn't been. That's what I'd like to say. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. The good thing is it is very historical and it is very cultural. And when you go to England, you can see the crown jewels, and you can go to Tower Bridge, and you can go to Buckingham Palace, and you can go to the museum, and you can see the stuff. And then there's real people that are still alive that are connected to that. Do those people need to be thrown in jail? I don't think so. They do good things and bad things like other people. But anyway, a lot of English history is about kings and queens. Part of the reason that it's not a dictatorship, it's not like Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un, if you pardon me relating something, it's that the direct inheritance from one male to another. That is like a monarchy. It's a certain type of monarchy, though, which in the case of Kim Jong-un, it's absolute monarchy. If you do anything that the leader doesn't like, they remove you. They kill you, they throw you in jail, you disappear. Even if it's your brother, you still might get killed by poison in the airport, okay? English monarchy was never like that. They tried to be like that, but it was never, there was no iron fist of dominance over the culture the way that North Korea has had. So it's different. There's some similarities, and I'll probably make some comparisons later. This is not because I'm anti-North Korean at all. I sympathize with North Korea. I'm just pointing out the type of government they have. It's not the Democratic Republic of North Korea. It's not the DPRK. That's not a correct name. They made that up, and nobody gets to vote, and the leader controls everything. Similarly, in the beginning, William, which we'll talk about in class, William the Conqueror, he was as close to an absolute king as there could be. He took over the country. People tried to stop him. People tried to kill him. People tried to remove him. He destroyed everybody. He died having crushed everybody who had power in England. Was done. Okay? That we will come back to in class. Most of these things are not in the textbook. This is why this class, this lecture in particular, is important that you pay attention to. There are many kings and a few queens. They're often dying, sometimes young, sometimes old, sometimes suddenly, sometimes young. When they suddenly die, it's a big problem. When they die young, it's a big problem. This happens over and over again. When there's not enough sons and they need to choose somebody else, it's a big problem. When there's too many sons, it's a big problem. They kill each other. If there's 6 sons, they normally kill each other. If there's 0 sons, then the cousins have to fight each other. This is what happens when William comes over, in fact. So there's too many kings to remember. I can remember them all finally, but it's taken me years and we only have a few months. Let's just go from, there's a lot of kings. They are dying all the time. That's what we're going to remember because we're far ahead. So you look back and some of them get very old, but you can't predict when somebody dies, and so it's hard to prepare. Even Queen Elizabeth, they knew she was dying for a while, and they were like, who's going to be? You don't have any kids. Who's going to be the next one? Please tell us. And she didn't want to until the last minute. This is not helpful. The kings often need money. They need money to fight wars. They need money to control their kingdom. They need money for stuff, right? Nobody likes taxes. Everybody who's a king or a leader, again, like the leadership in North Korea, it doesn't matter how rich or poor your country is. If you want to be rich and you control 25 million people, then you have a lot of stuff. If the people don't want to pay it or they can't pay it, then you end up begging them for it, fighting them for it, power struggles ensue. When there's poor dying kings, this equals unhappy people. Now, we can also add into this, I added with my blue marker after I looked at it, some kings are very angry, it seems like. They feel like the people should listen to everything they say, right? Now, this is not democratic. It's not how you're supposed to ask people to listen to you, and then they're supposed to listen, and then they're saying, I agree with you, I vote for you. That's a democracy. Telling people what to do and taxing them whenever you feel like it and doing whatever you want with your money is not a democratic behavior. Case in point, I wrote this book when Donald Trump was being elected, and he is not a democratic leader. He was a president of a democratic nation, but he hates democracy. He hates listening to people. He just wants to do whatever he wants. He admires strong leadership like people from countries. North Korea, he met Kim Jong-un actually at the DMZ, and he thought he admired how the North Korean people respected him. Similarly, in China and Russia, he admires how powerful those people are. Kings behave like that, right? Julius Caesar famously got killed 22 times. He was stabbed by the senators in Rome. The reason they stabbed him is because even if he wasn't a king, some people said he wanted to be the king. He was like, no, I don't need to. Of course you don't need to be a king. They don't have to say King Caesar, but you are. You behave like one. So they killed him because they couldn't stop him. So they stabbed him 22 times in the Senate while he was listening to them. It's a famous story. It's the end of the Roman Republic, right? We talked about Julius Caesar. He never goes away. Julius Caesar is a fascinating person. Shakespeare wrote a play. You should watch it. It's really good. So we have a lot of angry people, angry kings, tension all the time. England in particular has a problem. They have a lot of money problems for various reasons. This causes them to have to listen to people more. And this is part of the evolution of, instead of having a revolution where they change their government style like America did, just over time, the people in England and then Scotland and finally Ireland too will demand that their leaders listen to them, and eventually they'll take all of the power away from the kings and queens until they don't have any power at all. They just have enough money to be a very rich person. Like Queen Elizabeth really had no power, actual power. She was a symbolic leader. And Charles III, have you heard him do anything politically? Has he talked about Ukraine? Has he sent money anywhere? Has he, told other countries to do something? No, he doesn't have any of the power of the king and queen in England is gone. This is a time where they have to show how powerful they are to be effective. So William, he dies. We'll talk about that. His son, William Rufus, he splits the kingdom into two parts, Normandy and England. And William II becomes king of Normandy. And then king of England becomes William. I'm fact-checking myself here and listening to myself at the same time, which is also something that good YouTubers do. So I'm working on simplifying and also having the ability to make sure I'm not making mistakes as I go. So William dies. William Rufus, William II, he doesn't last very long. He dies in a hunting accident, but he's the king of England, and the Duke of Normandy is Robert. The weird thing is, William, king of England, and Duke of Normandy, he thought Normandy was better than England, so Robert is the first son. He's in Normandy. His second son gets England. His third son, Henry, he gets money. William dies suddenly in a hunting accident. Remember? Dying kings, not good. William, the money is, I believe, at Winchester. Henry and his men run there, get the money. So he's not poor and he's not dead. And he becomes Henry I of England. Robert, the firstborn son, went to the Crusades and came back. And he's in Normandy and he's can't get the money, so too bad. They fight. Robert loses. He ends up, his younger brother puts him in jail. He dies. Henry becomes Henry I, the king. So it's William, Henry. Don't need to remember that. You don't even need to remember anything except for Henry I after William. The other stuff is just, I think, pointing out how messy it is and why people become involved. Other people become important. I can't talk to you about all the people, but knights and earls, like I said about Earl Godwinson and his son Harold, who takes over being king before William fights him and he loses. Other people than the king constantly are important because the kings are poor and dying, so they need help. For our international students who speak French, Henry, his name is Beauclerc, which I believe means beau. To me, beau means beautiful, and you would know that beau is the root word for beautiful in English, and clerk, clerk is somebody who studies, somebody who does work, clerical work, or somebody who's just working and selling, counting things, telling you what you have to pay. But originally, I think the original meaning of this name, Beauclerc, means sort of like smart scholar, like smart student, almost intelligent. It's funny because Henry, he was actually more of a warrior king, but he also has this nickname, the Lion of Justice, because he was smart and he made a lot of laws, and he was alive for a long time, which didn't destroy his power because he was alive for it. So it was a very stable time. He was alive for, like, he was running around Ireland, England, Scotland, Normandy, his whole life, making sure everything was stable. Whereas it wasn't so stable in France at the time, or in Burgundy, or in Aquitaine, or in Spain, or anywhere else. Well, Spain, I shouldn't say Spain. Spain isn't Spain. It's mostly Islamic at this point. It's, during the 11th century, it's probably 80% Islamic territory, right? There's a caliphate in Spain, so it's not even Spain as you would recognize it. So anyway, Henry lives a long time, unexpectedly survives a long time, lives until he's a sort of grandfather, way longer than he really should at that time, and without real doctors and hospitals. So he dies old, and he has no son to take over by the time he dies. Nobody survives except for his daughter. His daughter's name's Matilda, and she's very powerful and very interesting, and she gets married to the Duke of Anjou, and they sort of try to take over, but the nephew named Stephen, we'll call him Uncle Stephen, he takes over. He doesn't like fighting, and he's not like Henry, he's not active. He takes over and he can't keep control, and Matilda, who was married to the Holy Roman Empire, comes back, marries the Duke of Anjou. She's messing around behind the scenes, trying to take over power the whole time. So it's a big mess. She has a young man, has a son, also named Henry, with her husband, the Duke of Anjou. And they wanted England for themselves, but they couldn't quite do it. So Uncle Stephen, who doesn't have any children either, dying and poor king, Uncle Stephen, he will instead pass the power to Henry when he dies, because he doesn't have his own son anyway. So it goes from uncle to nephew and uncle to nephew. So it's pretty messy. This doesn't make for powerful, continuous kings. It ends up making political unrest. Actually, Shakespeare hates this kind of stuff, and most historians say, what you really need is just father to son, for several generations, and have good, capable kings that respect, are responsible, don't spend all their money and do nothing, but take care of the kingdom properly, and then you end up with a strong kingdom, which France will eventually do, but not for hundreds of years. England will do it, but really not in the way that France does ever. So what happens is Henry II, he's young, his uncle dies, he takes over, he is going to marry the woman she divorces the King of France, and then runs away and marries the King of England. So France and England are just going to be entangled all the time. Part of the reason Eleanor of Aquitaine runs over to Henry is Henry's speaking French, perfect French, or Norman French, better French than I ever will, and as well as our French international students can. Although if you're from Paris or southern France, you would probably be like, oh, Norman French is just not the best French. But hey, Quebecois French is basically based on Norman French. A lot of the people who moved to Quebec in Canada, they were from Normandy, so I respect the Norman French. The English kings were French first. They didn't even speak English. William tried, couldn't get it, gave up. Every generation they will speak better English, but French is their first language. So they're communicating in French in the court. The language of England is French. The official language of the English is French. You got to keep this in mind the whole time until we get down to some more Henrys, Henry IV. Hundreds of years they will be speaking French at court. And of course, this is great for communication with all the people who live in France, but it also means that the French and the English are always interfering with each other because they communicate perfectly. They can really understand each other's jokes. They can insult each other. They can write things down. Usually they can speak Latin and English to a certain extent. So they're like most kings in England, are pretty smart. 3 languages at least. It's like the Switzerland of the Middle Ages. Switzerland doesn't really exist yet. So Eleanor, she's quite a bit older than Henry, but although they hate each other later and Henry puts her in jail, she gives him lots of children, including 4 sons, which we will talk about later. Both of them are in the textbook, so we're just going to pretend that they're just 4 sons, but 2 of them are very important, and they're famous. They're part of the whole Robin Hood story and everything. Henry, there's a mythology around him because he was just like his grandfather. He was very active. He was fighting everywhere. He will fight his own children. He will fight his wife, and eventually he'll die, losing to his own children while they take away his crown. He will die, a poor dying king, like they usually do. One of his problems is this guy, Thomas of Becket, who's also definitely a Norman guy. When he's young, Henry really wants to control the whole country like all good kings do with an iron fist, right? Think dictatorship, authoritarian rule. He can't do it though. One of the problems is religion. The power of Christian religion is located in Rome, and the Pope is the top person in that triangle. The king is below the Pope religiously. Politically, in England, they're kind of often struggling with each other, and the Pope wants a certain person in England representing the church, and the king wants somebody else usually, but the Pope usually gets the choice. Henry is lucky in that the Archbishop of Canterbury, I shouldn't say lucky, sorry Archbishop, but the Archbishop of Canterbury dies, and he is hanging out with his friend Thomas, who actually was not a rich person, but sort of studied hard and got scholarships and worked his way up through the church, but he also loved hunting and hanging out with girls and drinking and doing things that Henry liked to do, even though he was married. The kings, didn't follow the rules very much. So he was often, with the king doing all this stuff. So as soon as the Archbishop dies, and Thomas is the High Chancellor, so he's a very high-level sort of government official who works for Henry, and he's like his best friend, and they party together, and he thinks he can just, he's a Anglo-Norman guy, just like Henry, so he thinks, I'm going to make Thomas the Archbishop of Canterbury, and this will be great. I'll just tell him, whisper to him, I want to do this, and he'll just say, I think in the interests of the church and the state, we should do this. That's what the dream was. But Thomas Becket decided he wanted to be a real priest suddenly. And when he became archbishop, he didn't listen. He stopped listening to Henry. And Henry, he's an interesting guy in all aspects. The older queen, all the children, they all end up being interesting in their failures or their successes. It's just a very interesting time. Arthur, the legends of King Arthur are being written at this time. One of the sons is going to think that he is King Arthur and pretty much go, down to Jerusalem and fight against the Muslims because he thinks he's King Arthur and he needs to get the Holy Grail, and he's got a sword named Excalibur. We'll talk about him later. But really, Henry is kind of a Arthurian type person, and his wife loves the songs, the stories, the literature, the poetry. It's all in French, but it's about England. It's about ancient England, but it's in French. Eventually, it's going to be all translated to English, but the original stuff is Romance languages, Roman de Breu and stuff like that. Really old French stuff, written by French-speaking English people for the most part. Some of them are living in Aquitaine, but they're all under the English crown. Okay, so some of the earliest French literature you can read in Old French is this stuff written by English people. You can check it out. It's true. I don't need to fact check myself because I know it's true. Anyway, Thomas Becket, he keeps blocking Henry whenever he wants to do something that he thinks the church doesn't want or doesn't need. Essentially, Thomas doesn't allow it to happen. And this is incredibly frustrating for Henry, so much that he used to get super angry all the time. You can imagine being angry. All your children and your wife are fighting you, and your best buddy priest is blocking you, and you're just fighting all over the place, verbally, politically, militarily. He's just a very, very frustrated, angry person. And I can understand that. But he used to just freak out and just fall down on the ground and start chewing the carpet. There's no carpet. There's a bunch of reeds and sort of grass that's all dry, probably full of bones and dirt, disgusting. And he would just chew it out of frustration, like he has mental illness. And he probably did. And so one day he just, in one of his rages, Thomas thought he was going to die, so he went to Normandy for a few years, and then he thought that him and the king had, solved their issues, but he was wrong, and Henry still wanted to kill him, but he couldn't, so he just supposedly just said, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" In other words, he's just like, "Will somebody just take care of this guy for me?" And 4 of his knights supposedly overheard this and were like, "Let's take care of this," like a gangster kind of thing to do. The godfather or the gang leader, the boss, the big boss says, somebody get rid of this guy. He's a big problem. Somebody do it. He doesn't say, "You, please go kill him." He just says, "Somebody take care of this problem." And so they do. They go and they find him. When they find him, he's praying in the center of the cathedral at the shrine, in the most holy place, the place you should never touch anybody or kill anybody, especially a priest. The worst place if you don't want to go to hell to do something. They find him praying and tell him, "Let's go." Thomas says, "I'm not going with you," because he knows he's going to get kidnapped and probably thrown in jail or just killed. So he said, "I'm not going," and he continues to pray, and people start coming. Canterbury has lots of people there, mostly priests. People start coming, and the knights panic, so they cut his head in half and then run away. And so, the most important Christian person, most powerful, most important person dies in the most important sacred place in England, right there. When other people hear about this, they're horrified. Anybody who goes to church is like, that's the only thing you can't do. You can murder somebody in a river or on a boat or in a castle, but you can't kill somebody in the Canterbury Cathedral. that's the place that you're not supposed to do anything that's against the Bible, like kill people. But Henry couldn't convince the Pope that he didn't mean to do it. So he had to do a lot of things to get forgiven, including being whipped by a priest in front of everybody in public, which doesn't do anything for your, his anger problem didn't go away after he had to pray and be whipped in front of part of his kingdom in London. So Henry ends up one of those perfect examples of amazingly powerful, good leadership, ends up with too many sons, can't solve his problems politically or religiously, and ends up, the whole thing just explodes in his face. And one of his sons will just kind of lose control of all of the things he tried to protect. His name is John. We'll just put his name there because he's going to be important in class next. John's going to mess everything up. He's Prince John, and then he becomes King John when his older brother dies. But Stephen and John, they're the only names in English history that there's only one king, because they were so bad that they never made Stephen II or John II, because those two kings John is probably the worst ever. There's other possible choices, but I'm going to say John's the worst ever. Stephen doesn't probably deserve to be the second worst ever, but anyway, there's some bad ones. John and Stephen, they never repeat those names because they know they were really bad and they don't want another really bad one. So that's the end of the Johns and the Stephens, which is nice because there is 8 Henrys, and after Henry VIII, there's no more Henrys. He wasn't very great either, we'll see. Okay, that's all I got for today. You might have to watch this more than once. You might have to make some notes. Most of this stuff is not in the textbook except for the things I alluded to, so make sure you're careful about writing this down. This will be stuff that's for quiz number 1, not the practice quiz, which we'll do next week. All right, thank you for listening, and see you in class.